That was a good one. Kept us guessing until the very end.
the idea.
Yes, yes, yes. The Boleyns we're going to hear a lot about today, and all of this will become known as the Great Business. And nobody had to ask what that business was because it definitely created quite a bit of stir. When you think of all the individuals who've been kings in the past and all of them who were unfaithful, then we think about this particular incident and how many. And last week, for those of you who were here and who didn't skip, I meant were absent, and you know who you are. I'm over it. I have dealt with the pain you caused me. I mean, I'm not blaming you. You have a right to live your own life. But I'm okay now. I've had therapy dealing with the pain that you caused me. But yeah, the idea of Hever Castle, which I would highly recommend you go when you're in London, because it's right outside town, was the home of the Boleyns. And I was flabbergasted that now, between T-shirts and coffee mugs and all the rest, Anne Boleyn apparently is one of those objects of fascination. I don't think she'll replace Winston Churchill. So, World War II folks can be relieved. But if you like Tudors, there's always Anne Boleyn.
I have a question. Is she bigger than Neville Chamberlain?
Oh, yeah. I mean, nobody cares about that. It's Churchill and all of the Blitz and whatnot. No, I don't think Mr. Chamberlain or Stanley Baldwin make that rank. It's all about Churchill. But I'm just thinking about what we Americans find fascinating, because believe me, it's our money that keeps all this going, and people from the Commonwealth, I suppose, but largely Americans, I'd say, who buy all this items. I won't use a vulgar word, but just, I mean, all these interesting stuff. That's okay. But anyway, this is the Great Business, and of course, here she is in a famous, and Lord, that bee, you see the bee on that is now, that'll be on the T-shirts. You can go to the Hever Castle entrees online, and I was flabbergasted to see all that items that are available. You know, food and this money, or yeah. So we understand, of course, there are a lot of people who want a lot of this material stuff. And she, being a member of the Boleyns, is an object of fascination because Henry VIII had been unfaithful before. And I know you're shocked, but he did enjoy reading. He had other hobbies. But he had, while he was younger, and he and Catherine, his wife, first wife, got along famously. That's not a problem. She was just a product of that age that wives apparently had to put up with it. The idea, though, with Anne Boleyn was, of course, she came from a very prominent family, closely attached to the monarchy, both father and uncle. And at the same time, her sister Mary had been a cast-off lover. Yes, now married. So Anne, who had been, I would say, almost reared in France, had quite a bit of background. So I'm not underestimating her at all. And she had coaches, which is fairly disgusting when you think include her father and her uncle, because they had plans. As far as her sister Mary was concerned, she too must have been developing, what would you call it, strategies, ploys. And thanks to her family was, amazingly to me, one of Catherine of Aragon's court members. Because you think, could this really be going on? Apparently it was behind her back, or while we would say making eyes at each other or something of that sort. We know, of course, the idea of considering the possibilities of having a quote unquote relationship with Anne, but Anne held out for more. Yeah. So this became the strategy. I'd really like to. You're so wonderful. But I just don't think we're ready for that stage of the relationship or other kinds of. And it worked. He was so captivated, which is fascinating in itself. And how many novels and movies have that particular theme created? And that, of course, is why Anne becomes so significant, to turn down the king himself, which simply creates intensity, I would assume is a good word for it. Okay. Now, for you of youth, you need to understand I choose ancient films. But some of us being ancient know about these. And my favorite Canadian played Anne Boleyn, Geneviève Bujold, who I'm happy to say is still with us. She made a lot of films. And believe it or not, I was shocked to realize that was Richard Burton. He is so cleverly disguised to me. And the Anne of the Thousand Days has to be one of the most, well, that day, an interesting version of that particular relationship. And boy, when she moved in, once literally and figuratively, once she had him around, because they dated, euphemistically, for a while before she said, "Oh, I love you too so much." So the family, the whole orchestration by the Boleyns makes me amazed at how long this must have developed. And of course, as a great actress, I guess you would say, she was very demure. I suppose she continued her duties with the Queen. And poor Catherine, bless her heart, as we say, she really didn't have much to say about all of this. She just had to deal with it. But anyway, I'm not sure that Anne looked as good as Geneviève Bujold in 1969, but that's why we go to movies, because that gives us the fictional version. But again, all of it really is fiction, and how many people have played the part of Anne Boleyn over the years. This is not a movie class, but I'm just saying it is interesting to think about particular versions like this. Now, infatuation and the devotion of the Boleyn family. And I'm sure they had, like coaching sessions or, working strategies. If at first you don't succeed, that kind of thing. So it was deliberate. And she had lots to do because, of course, as I say, her father and uncle were involved in this too, because they saw the opportunity of greater power for themselves, naturally, because if they had someone right next to the king, the pregnancy that developed, of course, would change everything. Now, let me say right off the bat, I do not believe the Church of England existed because of a sexual relationship. But I do believe that it created a momentum for the king, believing as doctors, well, I guess, what do they call them in modern terms? OBGYN. So soothsayers. Oh, yeah. And they would say just what the king wanted to hear. It's a boy. It's a boy. Catherine couldn't do it, but we've got great plans. And that's what he wanted. You said, but he already had a son. Yes, but an illegitimate one. And you say, well, love child or not, they can be legitimated. Why take the chance? We could have one, and the soothsayer says it's a go. We can have a legitimate son. Now, all of this makes us wonder, how could you get away with that? Well, we go to Rome. Well, we don't. We send somebody there and we remind the Pope of the problems. And what are those problems? Well, they are scriptural. Catherine, well, see, she was married to my brother. So the Bible tells us that she more or less can't have a son. Could say a child, but she has a child by the name of Mary. So that doesn't quite work out, but it works for him. And because he said basically she hasn't been able to produce a son that survived, and that shows that I shouldn't have married her in the first place because I violated God's teachings. I mean, yeah, he was theologically oriented. He knew his Bible, and I guess people can use the Bible however they want to. So now he sends Cardinal Wolsey to Rome. Why Wolsey? Well, Wolsey was a cardinal, and cardinals should like to go to Rome. I mean, it's a nice trip. Probably not as nice as it is now, because let's face it, some of you remember last week we talked about 1527. Now, I don't expect everybody to know dates like a certain scholar here does, but for those who don't remember 1527, that was the invasion of Rome by some unfortunate guerrilla troops, supposedly under Charles V's command. But they were out of control and they misbehaved. Like say, took souvenirs without paying for them, that kind of thing. So, more or less, Wolsey goes, and basically he probably wants to do what we would call working with papal administrators, saying, you know, the boss would really appreciate this, and maybe giving them the equivalent of lire, you know. And you're asking yourself, do I mean the filth of lucre? Yes, I do. Bribes. They had a lot to be ashamed of. I'm sure they were terribly upset, tossing and turning it up. But that went on, hoping to persuade the Pope that, you know what, you're right. It really wasn't a marriage. And that Pope before, that Julius II, that just was a very, very bad decision. Well, it didn't happen. So Wolsey then was in trouble, because that's not the kind of thing that you want to get a no to when the boss wants, you know, see, you know, and all of that. Here he is. He's often called the most unlucky pope in history. I know. So you can drop that at parties and say, gosh, your Ollie dollars at work. Yes. But yeah, it's Clement VII. You say, but I think of him as a Medici. Yes. I think of him as a great supporter of the arts. Yes. I mean, there are many wonderful things we can say about him, including choosing great artists to paint me. Yeah. This is not Olin Mills. This is nothing wrong with, yeah, Sears and Roebuck. Yep, I remember the day. But all of that is to say that you would like to have a Raphael or a Titian or someone if the price was right. But if you are a Medici and a Pope, I'm assuming you can afford the best. In any event, he was a younger kinsman of, and everybody will remember Leo X, I hope, who was Pope during the unfortunate Lutheran trouble. So now we've moved on and we have more trouble. And this, of course, was, how is Clement going to deal with Wolsey? And I'm sure there's a lot of going back and forth and saying, oh, I'm so sorry about your king. He's a great man. I love him so much. You say, but that sounds like pandering. Yes, there is a bit of that. I love your king very much. Sincere, I'm not so sure. But it's no doubt that, you know, like if you're in sales and you hate to lose a customer, I mean, I think the idea that if we have real problems with Henry VIII, what are we going to do? Well, I mean, if you're Pope, I'm not sure that you're thinking, well, what will he do? Become a Lutheran? I don't think so. He become an Orthodox? No. What else can you do? Well, that, of course, is going to be the answer, because as far as Clement was concerned, he had to deal with someone even closer. The emperor, and you would always get this right. If you were on Jeopardy or some other show, you would win big money, because you would know the Habsburg emperor, because you would require so little, or maybe just 1527, and you would, the buzzer, you'd say, Charles V, Charles V. because you would know that. Because that's, I mean, if you bring that up, you bring that up to Clement VII, he would probably start shaking. And you say, gosh, but don't they love each other? In theory, in a perfect world, they would have. Pope and Emperor, chummy, mi amore, and all of that. But in real life, not so much. Your people messed up my city and left some. They were not like Susan Spotless, and they left some litter, and they weren't nice when they came in 1527. So all of that is, it's not a warm and loving relationship like you would think like fathers and sons should be. So if I basically announce that my Aunt Catherine is not really married to Henry VIII, that's going to put me in a really bad mood because she will be dishonest. The idea is, I don't think so much that, I don't think they spent that much time together that, oh, Aunt Kate, I just love you to death, that kind of thing. It's more about family honor and so forth, don't you think? It's like, I mean, it's not like they were writing each other, but remember, this goes way back. Everybody remembers Ferdinand and Isabella and Charles' mother, Catherine's sister, Joanna. And you remember that because of that, he was Catherine's nephew. So all of this say, this would have offended him, saying, you mean Aunt Catherine was living in sin? Shacking up with Henry, or, something crude like that. And I don't think he would have been happy about that. Whether or not there was direct correspondence between nephew and aunt, I don't know. But it was a question the Pope had to think about. Because let's face it, England's a lot further away than the emperor was. And the emperor's close. And sometimes closeness can be endearing, but sometimes it can be somewhat unpleasant. So far as saying, Julius was just wrong. He just had this completely wrong. I think he would hate to do that, although one later pope, again, you really want to learn all the popes. Urban VIII would say, I know, maybe too much, mind glut, but they'll be very impressed when you go to Vatican if you remember Urban VIII. But he would say, a living pope is worth 12 dead ones. And, that's probably true. I mean, once that particular pope is gone, and there was St. Peter hanging out, the new pope, he's the boss. So all of this is to say that perhaps Clement didn't want to disagree with the previous pope. So he is in a great jam. And in case you forgot, and I know you haven't, because all of you remember 1453. I'm counting on that. When I get up for this class on Tuesdays, I think, she won't forget it. The taking, you say, well, gosh, we're into the 1500s now. You are mighty right. And who's knocking on the door? Yes. I was going to say Thanksgiving surprise, turkey. The Turks are coming. The Turks are coming. And you think, oh my gosh, does Charles V have a lot on his mind? Aunt Catherine's got her problems. The Pope seems irritated, nay, cross. And, and that those darn Turks. So he's got a real full plate. I told you he would very, very hard to be Pope. I mean, you think of it being very luxurious and having a great time and partying, but there's more to it. So Clement was very, very much in a quandary about what to do. Oh, did I not mention Lutherans and Calvinists? So if we thought we had one problem, no, we have manifold problems. And so we don't want problems with the English monarchy. So basically, he does this. Basically, he says, let's just have a sort of court to hear both sides and make our minds what we do. Now, I'm bringing back a tree that you've grown to love. This is genealogical arboretum that this, of course, will just show you why this matter is such an interest. There's Charles. Interesting, he's married to a Portuguese, right? One of several. But all of that is to say, and there's Aunt Catherine. And look who their baby boy is, somebody who's coming to a classroom near you, Philip II. And he is very, very important to our story. But not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, no. But who is coming? Campeggio. He is a most interesting fellow. Campeggio was what we call a canon lawyer. He'd been around, had quite a career. I think he'd been married, had children. And then after his wife died, he went into the church. Didn't take about celibacy after that. And he got a great career going as a canon lawyer. You say, man, lawyers. Well, depends on how good you are. And he was very good. And canon law can be very profitable when you think about the size of the church. And, you know, folks like to sue nowadays. Yeah, they did then too. And of course, the church and the property and all the rest of it meant that this Campeggio, I think his name was something distinguished like Antonio or some excellent, yeah. But he was a big deal as a canon lawyer. So Clement basically sends Campeggio back with Wolsey and says, gee, I can't decide what I need to do about Henry's marriage to Catherine. I think you two need to have a legal session and you decide, you know, sort of like you make the verdict and then I'll approve what you all decide. Well, of course, in a separate document, we know that he told Campeggio to do what many lawyers do. Stall. You say, not like they say in Latin, quam celerime, as swiftly as possible. Check with your, I mean, and you think, what is it they say, the wheels of justice sometimes go slowly? Yeah. Clement VII basically thought the best way was just slow and cross-examine and bring in more witnesses, and they brought everybody who was there on Catherine's wedding night. I mean, it's all of that we can make this painfully slow. And then finally, somebody's going to say, it's really not worth continuing with this. That was Campeggio's strategy, and it seemed to work very well because you can imagine Henry, by this point, had persuaded, or maybe her father, uncle had, Anne to more than date the king, if you get my drift. And so at this stage, biology takes its course. Biology dictates, at least in the zoology class I took, a 9 months period. So basically, the king now has, and the clock is ticking, real need. Oh, what is it? Get me to the church on time? I won't sing, don't worry. But there is a real need. Ding dong, yeah. It's very important that we proceed. So it must have been wild, and this is where they're supposed to be in this 19th century rendition. You see Wolsey and Campeggio and the Catherine begging her husband to preserve their marriage. And remember, they had a daughter, the Princess Mary, who had more or less been sort of dumped by her father. And you talk about somebody growing up with some psychological problems. Yeah, I mean, could you imagine? It's hard to imagine back in that day. But in any event, all of this is to say that she had no chance when you think about what was happening, of course, in terms of Anne Boleyn's body, because we got to get hitched. Because you say, but a blessed event is blessed regardless of whether anybody's wearing a ring, right? But that's not the point, is it? It's the legitimacy of an heir. Just not another love child. Love children are nice too. I'm not saying that, it's like,
Fitzroy.
Yeah, exactly. We've already got that. And that's great because he was a nice kid. But we have to move on. This time we're going to have one who's legitimate and he's going to be special. And you know how I know? Because everybody says so. That's what's very important. It's amazing to me that a man as intelligent as Henry would have believed that, but I guess you believe what you want to. And of course, a lot of this has to do with Wolsey. Wolsey had been so very important in this process. And when they did not make a decision and said we need more time, Henry basically, well, let's just say he had a little temper tantrum. Because remember, biology, 9 months. And it's growing there in Anne's body. And she said, oh, I love you so much and all that. So, I know, not very romantic, is it? But he is, how can I say this? Cross, irritated. There's so many wonderful synonyms that Roger, you probably have some other expressions that we won't give here. But basically, Wolsey was finished. And you say, oh, I love that golden parachute. No, I don't think we're going to have a golden parachute. And you know why we don't have a golden parachute? It's because Henry was vexed, irritated. I mean, all of the things you can think of. And we always have to remember that it's been a good run. Wolsey had done well. I mean, you know, like they used to say, Butcher's son. He'd made it up from carving up the veal or pork loin, whatever what it is, and now a cardinal and very, very important. And now the end is near. But how this comes about is a fascinating tale of how he makes various journeys. He goes to York for his first trip up there, and he's actually installed as Archbishop, which he'd been for many years, which is somewhat ironic. And by the time his health is failing, but Henry had planned for him to check in to everybody's favorite, the Hilton of that day, the Tower of London. But he never got to because St. Peter had other plans, which did not involve breathing. Yeah, he actually died on the way. Yeah, he had been installed as Archbishop of York, and King said, you know, I'd love to visit with you. So once you check into the tower, we can have a visit. I love you so much. Yeah. So that's the end of Wolsey. Cromwell, who, according to some versions, was really very significant and not that bad a fellow. But in this case, Cromwell had worked for Wolsey. And you know what happens when one loses, somebody else gains. I mean, it's good to be number two, but it's even better to be number one. And that's really what happens here. When Wolsey passes on, then Wolsey will more or less by de facto give that position to Cromwell. And Cromwell was ready, willing, and able. And for his years, he will be the king's faithful servant. And that can be nice, or it can be unnice. And I can assure you, he was not going to have any concerns about whether or not the Pope's feelings or the Emperor's feelings were going to be hurt, because he was ready to act, as we all know. Meanwhile, this poor fellow, I have to bring him. I know a lot of people don't know him. I don't know if he always makes all the movies or all the books, but I thought I'd mention him because, you know, Monty, we were talking earlier about Canterbury Cathedral. And, you know, if you went there and you were hanging out with a bunch of Canterbury people and saying, what do you think about, try this sometime when you're taking Archbishop Wadham, what do you think about him? Can you imagine? They'll be impressed because not everybody knows about him. And you say, is he a saint? Indeed not. But he was a brilliant administrator. But it's like, you know, you might make the Administrators Hall of Fame, but that's not the same thing as life of sanctity. Not that I'm saying he had any wild life. I'm just saying that wasn't his thing. And he had a very hard life, being Archbishop of Canterbury under Henry VIII. And the convenient thing for Wadham was basically he died. If he had lived, I know. You think, gosh, is that really good? It is if you were him. Would you have liked to live and think that the king would have called you in and said, I run the church, and Walden said, now wait a minute, I'm not sure if I'm exactly comfortable with that. Yeah. So he just, sometimes it's better to be out of there, and you can't just say,
Was that for natural causes or was that?
totally natural. Yeah.
Or suspicions?
No. There's nothing to be. No. This is not going to be. Don't call him Crusoe or Miss Marple. This no, he was not well. We can talk about these folks. Boy, he may have gotten up to 50 or even 60. Lord, back then, it was not like people are going to live a long time. But he lived, and he died. I just thought it was interesting that he just makes his eternal exit for him in the nick of time. Yeah. But it wasn't any of this, ass bites him or something like, it's nothing very dramatic. He just old age and disease. And then, of course, comes the man. And Marnie, all who love the Book of Common Prayer, all you are Episcopalians, know this man well and honor him. And every time you pull out that Book of Common Prayer, you need to think about him. He's here. Thomas Cranmer. What an interesting fellow. Henry VIII was looking around. Wadham died, and so, he must have been going through CVs and considering different candidates. And you said, boy, wasn't this sort of, as they say in the world of politics, a dark horse, they call that in the old days. Somebody could be nominated. This was definitely a dark horse. He was a professor. He wasn't a big-time player in ecclesiastical politics. Nope. But Cranmer more or less played his cards right. I think he probably wanted it. But he definitely let it be known. I think so much of the former queen, but that marriage, that second marriage, so-called, it was no marriage. Because I am an intellectual, I'm a professor, and I know these things. You know how that goes. So that's our Cranmer. And Cranmer traveled. A very important fact, he had traveled in Germany, part of the empire, as we would say back then. And we'll find out he had Lutheran connections. Yes, I know. Is that allowed? Well, I'm not saying he was a card-carrying Lutheran. I'm just saying he probably, let's just say, Wiener Schnitzel and beer. Yeah. And that kind of thing. Is that allowed? No. But that Cranmer, he'd been around. So as he sort of played the sort of intellectual supporter of the king's position. Remember, by this time, Cromwell had moved in as the king's chief advisor. So now we have Cranmer, former dark horse candidate. And guess what Cranmer also had? Frau Cranmer. What you say? He had no celibacy? No. While he was among those Germans, yeah, he met this Lutheran damsel and fell madly in love. And could you imagine carrying that off? Because I do not think Frau Cranmer came out and said, I'm here. I want to see you all. Come on over for Wiener Schnitzel one night. No. It was a very, shall we say, clandestine marriage. Because she didn't come out for some time. Could you imagine how Henry would have felt about having an archbishop who had a wife? I mean, to spend a weekend at the no-tell motel, that's one thing. But a wife is a whole nother thing. Yeah. So basically, Cranmer is named Archbishop of Canterbury, and Act number 1, you guessed it, that marriage with Catherine of Aragon, null and void. Never happened. You know, they talk about divorce. That always annoys me. It's an annulment. We do need to understand it didn't happen. So basically then, if we want to legitimize the child, which they ultimately did, that's one thing. But now, what are we going to call her? The Princess Dowager of Wales. That is Catherine of Aragon. It's like, you know, she doesn't even get ex-queen. But in any event, it's very sad. But now, Cranmer, by the way, had been approved by the Pope because the nominations had to be submitted to Rome. And you think, why? Well, put yourself in the place of Clement. Are there a lot of choices? It's not like yes, no, maybe. It's like you do it or else. And you think there's something, what do they call it now? This revenue stream? I think there was an English revenue stream. And I think Rome wanted to keep that. We have some urban renewal there in Rome to consider. Yeah. So all of this means that the situation as far as approving of Clement is very, very important. So he did. I'm sure much to his regret later, but he did. And he didn't know about, he hadn't gotten an invitation to the wedding. So, because there was no wedding. Because, you know, again, archbishops aren't supposed to have wives. So that was definitely not something that was known until later. So the marriage takes place. Not surprisingly, it's performed by Archbishop Cranmer himself. And of course, the tummy's a little big, but that's okay with the king because that's going to be my boy. But it wasn't. It was, as Frank has already indicated, one of the greatest monarchs of the history of England. I should say Britain. Elizabeth I. Meanwhile, some people are not happy about it. And here is number 1. Thomas More. Some of you know him because you know your saints. St. Thomas More was famous for many things. And many of you know, would they have one of these yellow and black things that some people used in college for utopia? But I would hope not. No, because you would want to read this, the unexpurgated edition. You would want to read fully the long version. So I trust that all of you scholars would read page after page and not take the easy way out. But More's utopian work is certainly famous because his mind was amazing, and he's one of the great scholars of time. Now, many of us love Erasmus, and we think about the humanism of the period, and More is so well known. So, I mean, if you think about More's greatest hits and all that he did, you think how important that is. And unfortunately for him, he took the wrong side on the matter of Henry's second marriage, or at least according to Henry, his first. And that is to say, he refused to recognize it. Because in addition, Henry was more or less declaring that he was what no king had ever been before, head of the church, or as we say, supreme head of the church. And you're going like, well, isn't that a little presumptuous? I mean, I thought the Pope was there. Pope who? I mean, you think this is radical. This is, I don't know. I don't like this. I'm not comfortable with it. And More himself, being a respected intellectual. And that's why no notes or outlines or cheap Wikipedia, none of that would be, no, you want to do the utopia. And you can get a group together and discuss it, because that would be very, very impressive. And tell us about your work there. Yeah. But anyway, he was a great man, and he actually became chancellor after Wadham died. Remember poor Wadham, that Archbishop of Canterbury? This Henry VIII, being a little perverse, decided to make More, who was one of his confidants, by the way, serve as his chancellor. And I suspect More wasn't comfortable about that at all, but he did it. I mean, he's uncomfortable because by this point, he is actually married to that woman, Anne Boleyn, and declaring himself head of the church. And I'm thinking, More's not really comfortable with all this. And this is power of conscience. Now let's go back to the movies. Again, this is a learning experience for the youth.
But wasn't it not the Roman church, wasn't it the Church of England that he was the head of? I mean, at that point in time.
Oh, yeah. Just he wasn't claiming to be
Yeah.
the new pope, but he, as far as you as an English person was concerned, he's your boss. But he never said, "Hey, I'm the head of any church except England," because I've always thought all those other kings probably were jealous as could be. Why can't I be head of my church too? Because they'd all had to follow the Pope. But it is interesting, isn't it, that they didn't all say, well, now I'll just take my church and run with it. But they didn't. Meanwhile, far away, one of the great films of all time, I don't know how many Academy Awards. It had more Academy Awards than Best Actor, Best Film. Blew it away in 1966, right after the discovery of when they, yeah, it was a long, long time ago. But yeah, you all will recognize some of the people, and of course, the right actor who played Moore. The play and movie and novel and so forth were based on the idea of Man for All Seasons, developing Moore as a man of great courage who stood out in that way. And you say, but he had his fault. Well, in the movie, he has faults in the sense that he is stubborn in his beliefs and he's totally inflexible, and therefore he makes the king somewhat irritated. Yeah, can I say that? And so you see the king is there, and you see the Wendy Hiller plays the wife of Moore on her knees, and they are hoping somehow keep Moore alive, but in the end, his refusal, yep, he is going to end up at the tower because he refuses to acknowledge the supremacy of the king over the church, because the church is considered Catholic, and therefore a king's a big deal, but he's not the head. He's just number two is, I guess, the best you can get. But A Man for All Seasons, of course, has to do with Moore's courage, and it will be finally, believe it or not, 1935. Yeah, 19. That he will be canonized. Why that chose? Maybe the English Catholics had petitioned it for so long that they decided that it was time Moore was recognized. Now, not everyone agrees with that. I'm sure if you were a Lutheran in England, I'm not sure I would be visiting with Sir Thomas More. I don't think he cared too much for Lutherans or Calvinists, and said, or for that matter, Turks. But in the context of that period, this idea of More as being this believer, not as much in the supremacy of the Pope as he is, that people like Henry need to submit themselves to the authority, and being able to stand up for what he thinks and believes. So that's why he becomes the great center here of this very important film from long ago, and an interest that's continued through the reading of Utopia. And you can start right on that, and it'll go fast once you get into it. Theological, philosophical, and of course, here's somebody that I worry we don't give as much credit to as I would like for us to. Now, some of you may have friends or relatives in Rochester, New York. I do not. But I'd like to, because believe it or not, that is the home of St. John Fisher University. I know. I mean, I like Auburn, don't get me wrong. But can you imagine getting to teach at a school with a name like that? Now, why would you like to go? Go Big JF, and all that. There he is. Because He is the other major martyr in addition to Moore. Yes, he too visited the tower. And you say, but that's just one bishop and not a very important one. It is Rochester, England was a small southern area way down in West. You know why? I think it's because Fisher probably shot his mouth off too much. But you know, it's always the way, isn't it? I mean, it's like the big shots are the ones who know how to kiss the cheeks and do all the right things. So poor Fisher, he doesn't even look good. I mean, yeah, I don't think he was doing too well. Probably a little, yeah, very ascetic and more or less. And he stood up and said, you know, Your Majesty, we all love you to death. You're the great king. All you tutors are just magnificent, but you're not head of the church. Oh, Lord. Now you talk about the king and not had any anger management training. But you know, all the other clergy are going like, oh, we love you to death. You're the greatest. You think sycophants. I know. Not Fisher, though. Which gets you a trip to the tower. And you're out of there. The fact is, though, that Fisher and Moore are essentially the only ones who stand up. There are some who are, shall we say, radically motivated monks. They're called Carthusians. They are individuals who are extreme ascetics. And so but by and large, what I'm getting at, everybody else says, oh, yeah, you're the head of the church. Mm-hmm. And then they're going like, but what about Clement? Clement who? You know, like, gosh, I thought you loved me. What happened? It was an old song, Where Did Our Love Go? So, so Pope, what's a Pope? Yeah, that kind of, and so, but I found that John Fisher University up in Rochester. Boy, you think it's cold here. Yeah, you don't want to be in Rochester, New York. Not Rochester, Minnesota. Now. That's bad. But Rochester, New York could be real bad. But yeah, and Fisher, again, he's a little annoying. But everybody else says, oh, yeah, you're head of the church, and we love you so much. So it's very interesting that. And meanwhile, here she is now, the Princess Dowager. You might think, well, where's Charles V? Why doesn't he rescue her? Well, I'm not sure that he would be able to, number one. And she doesn't have an unpleasant time. I mean, she's separated from her daughter, which is, I'm sure, very painful. And of course, she has staff cutbacks. I know, that's a bummer. I mean, when you're former queen, you know, what if you were the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella? Wouldn't you expect to, I mean, you're not going to do your own scrubbing, washing and such, just because I'm an ex. I still have needs, servant needs. So she has staff, and she's still going to mass. You believe? Yeah. She is a serious Catholic. And so you won't need to have any copies of the Book of Common Prayer around her money. She is just fine. Thank you very much. She is like, I think some serious rosary usage is right there. In for the former queen, can we do that? Is it? Under with Arthur, her real husband. Yeah, that's the way Henry's going to have it. Because, of course, we got a sort of rewriting of history as far as that is concerned. I'm not sure that she ever acknowledged that she was not the true queen, or that Mary, her daughter, was the real heiress to the throne. You know, this had got to be very, very painful one way or another. And Boleyn, as we know, would go on as the queen, so-called, and bear the king another daughter, the Princess Elizabeth. And this, of course, would not be good for Anne's future. If there was anything more to it, that Henry decided that it was great up until the honeymoon, and then maybe she was not as charming as I thought. You know, we really had a wonderful time dating, but I love those weekends at the Love Hotel. I don't know. Whatever it is, I don't think they're going to make 50 or 60 years together. In fact, it was a real short nuptial. I believe the next child after Elizabeth was stillborn. So that is more or less what we call the end of the road. Yeah. So you could say that in terms of short relationship, you got it. Because Queen Anne Boleyn would be queen no more. It is interesting that both uncle and father felt she was expendable. I don't think if they were going to say amnesty or anything like that, because the story that's more or less accepted is that Cromwell would arrange that George, her brother, and others would be tortured into, as they used as a method, that they had all had sexual relations with Anne. And all of this, of course, meant that Anne was not fit to be Henry's spouse or queen. And that, of course, would then end the situation. It's amazing how fast it all was. When he wanted to be rid of her, I suppose he just told Cromwell, set this up. Because I really doubt that she had relations with her brother. But I can't imagine that in the circumstances, this would be something that under torture, people would be forced to admit. And of course, they were all going to die themselves. As far as Anne Boleyn's execution, it couldn't have been very pleasant. I understand the executioner, he was a specialist from France, and he had to be shipped in, and he took a little extra time. And I don't know, you know, it's really not a pretty story. But it went, once he was there and deciding on things. It worked out, so to speak. And meanwhile, you think the Boleyns were bad. Then we have the Seymours. And you think, oh, well, I'm sure they were just lovely people. I'm not, I know, I remember the movies too. But I don't know. I think those Seymours were also, they were into development. Let's say they had big goals. Our little Jane was a promoter of the family. And you're not going to believe this. What does every promoter female want to do? Be in the Queen's court. And so, ironically enough, Jane Seymour was in Anne Boleyn's court. I mean, it's like, really? See, if they'd all been reading like you would be, reading, philosophy and other work, you'd be too busy to think about these bad things, but you'd be too interested in utopia and living the life of virtue. But these folks did not have that kind of luxury. Jane Seymour, though, was, as one of Anne Boleyn's maids, made Sam somewhat domesticated, don't mean that. I mean, she would basically, in the latest way, that's a very good term for it. And the Seymours are very prominent, I guess, in some ways they were thinking they could move into the immediate circuit as the good friends of the Tudors. So, boy, she moved fast, very fast. The execution of Anne Boleyn is 1536. Well, shoot. And wham bam, he marries Jane Seymour right after the word of the execution. Because he must have had Cranmer right there. I know. It's like Vegas or something, Chapel of Love, have the Reverend Elvis before. I don't know. It's really so cheesy, isn't it? But Jane Seymour's ready to get some growth in the middle. And you know what that means. A baby is coming. And that's biology. I studied that. So there we have. It didn't last long though, because she was dead, I assume, from childbirth. She lived just a few days, so. But that's not the end of the Seymour story. Oh, far from it.
Is that Jane Seymour or Anne?
That's Jane Seymour. Thank you for asking.
Okay, I thought maybe it was an unflattering picture of Anne because when she was beheaded, she wasn't supposed to be pretty.
No. That's a very good point. Yeah. But I just decided we needed to get a little Jane because Jane's important. She does have the son. So she didn't get to enjoy it. But I'm assuming her family got a lot out of it. So she made their contributions. But you're right about that. And the funny thing is about the art, of which I know very little, it's like they do have a certain sameness of appearance.
Yeah, like a chin.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, well, I guess truthfully, they're very young and they don't seem to last very long either. Either through death or, death.
Hiram and fire 'em.
Yeah, I mean, it's like she had her chance. It's been real. I know. Yeah.
Was it ever thought that maybe Henry had VD because children born to mothers who are exposed to venereal disease have there's a 40% stillbirth, and there were a lot of stillbirths in this line.
Oh yeah, I mean, think there is a great possibility he had syphilis. So there. I think that's pretty well understood that he well carried the. But anyway, she went, and now before we go on to further lurid stories of Henry VIII, we have to get serious because he in Parliament, and you thinking, oh, Parliament, do you mean they are going to oppose him? I think not. They're going to love him. Because remember, it's just like Anglicanism. He didn't really ask your advice. He just wants you to say yes. And they say yes. These acts, restraint of appeals, means my word is the final word. I'm the boss. And those people in Rome, that's nothing to you. So this is one way he got rid of Wolsey way back when. He basically accused Wolsey of doing what Rome wanted him to do. And he said, yeah, but that was the way it's supposed to work. I am the cardinal. He said, you still violated my law. And you say, but that's not fair. That's a breaks. Secondly, active supremacy. I think it speaks for itself. You're in the English church. I'm the last word. I'm number one. And Rome is a nice place to visit, but that's it. And you're thinking, St. Augustine, Canterbury, and you remember Venerable Bede? I know you do. And you think, boy, you're talking about Canterbury morning. It's like I was thinking about the tomb of St. Thomas of Becket. He had that shut down because he didn't want any of that. Yeah, he said it hurts my feelings, You get negative vibrations about kings that way. And so, because, Becket represented the power of the church and all that. And he wanted subservience. So, that we don't need to have that. We want people to say, I heart Henry, King love. Yeah, it's all about restraint of annates. Now, if you've never had to pay an annate, that's good. You'll have to pay enough. I mean, it's the end of January, so it's coming. Annates mean, in effect, say you want to be a bishop. You know what? It's going to cost you. We have service charges, carrying charges. You mean nickel and diming? No, I mean dollaring, because we're talking about the big bucks. Annates basically are your installment fees. Now, this can be carried over. You got carrying charge. There's interest. But if you don't mind, 20%, whatever it is. It's like the annates were the ecclesiastical, I guess you'd say, administrative costs. I think they used to call it postage and handling when we used to,
Fine print.
Yeah. Thank you. But that's nickel and diming. So restraint of annates mean that's all gone. Well, not so much gone as going to another source, closer to home. So we love you and we want to serve you. Our headquarters are here near you. So that will do that. And finally, the act of succession, which means in effect that, until the 20th century, I guess, the male will inherit the throne. I think, what was it, Elizabeth, the last one, who would say it would be the male, and now it's like whichever gender
Yeah.
is the eldest. All of this meant that James Seymour's son, the late James Seymour, is going to be the heir. And of course, he is a good little fellow and without a mother, and followed by his sister, elder, although she had some issues. Boy, did she ever marry. And then the queen that we all know, the Princess Elizabeth. So that's the order. So I guess that was the way Henry wanted it to be in terms of succession. Understanding, of course, that this plan was very, very important. Because remember, how could you forget the Wars of the Roses? Oh my gosh, all that fighting. And now we just don't want any of that. We want it neat and clean. And so all of this is done the 1530s, 1540s, and they more or less promised to carry them out. And of course, other than, remember, John Fisher, Rochester, and A Man for All Seasons, and a few monks, everybody else, more or less. I mean, in the privacy of your own home, do you think that darn Henry, he is just really claiming powers he really doesn't have. And then, they come out in public and say, oh, Henry, I love you so much. I mean, you love your head on your body. I mean, that is so nice. Feels good. So that is more or less a way to ensure that the authority of the king is now here. Now, what they might do with Mary is an interesting question. But I'm sure at the time he figured Edward would have a wife and children, so it really wouldn't matter. If you're thinking already about Mary, she loved Roman Catholicism. Her mother, remember, who could forget Ferdinand and Isabella? They were seriously Catholic, right? They went to the mass and meant it. Yeah. So, I mean, it's not like Mary was going to say, I was reading some of Luther's books. I think this is a great idea. I can't wait to become a Lutheran. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And God forbid, Calvin. No Geneva for me. I am all about the rosary. Yeah. So all of this meant that most accepted it. What was done, no more annex. There were other funding procedures. Yep. And of course, the execution. Notice I call it, I didn't even say Carthusians, I just said most ascetic. But these people really were on, I mean, strictly, what they call vegans now? I think strict veganism, yeah. All of this, though, means that most people, just said, I'm going to miss it. I'm not sure they said that, but because, mostly it's like development, fundraisers. I mean, it's like Pope people come and they come and they say, the Pope loves you. We need some funding here. So I know you want to give generously, give till it hurts.
Yep.
Yep. So, I mean, all of this, it might have a problem, and then you don't really have a choice. Do they ask you? You know, it's like, guys, from seventh grade, you know, you could sign yes or no, I like a girl. Or say, signed it. Yeah, well, they didn't do that. You just do it and say, but that's against my freedom of conscience. You don't have the freedom of conscience. There is one church, and this is it. And it's Anglican. Isn't that odd? You say, but my grandparents, they were good Catholics. Well, they were wrong, weren't they? And they're going to hell, yeah. Or maybe they could spend a little extra
You
time
don't
in
like a move to
purgatory.
wrong.
Yeah. Oh, we have to be really careful. Oh, here's what we end with. I love this guy. Paul the Third. And you know who that one is bowing there? His grandson. I know. We love grandchildren. They're so sweet. See how he loves it? And you say, well, that is beautiful. Is it? Because, I'll tell you something really bad. Nepotism has reared its ugly head once again. You say, how so? Well, Paul, in his earlier days, not recently, had little boo-boos, long weekend at the no-tell. And these were the parents were the results. So now the grandkids, they need something, you know, to keep them busy. So why don't we make them cardinals? It's a nice job for a kid to work and outdoors. Yeah, I know. Have beautiful outfits. Oh, Grandpa, can I run some errands for you? Yes, boy, you can do that. We're not crazy about it. So Paul the Third now, he succeeds Clement the Seventh, loves the arts. He's very good to artists, musicians, and others. And next to him is actually a Yorkist descendant. His name is Reginald Pole, and we'll talk more about him later. But he's a cardinal by this point. So he gets in the painting. And again, you hate to condemn, but please understand, Paul III was a notorious nepotist. I don't think there's a relative that he couldn't find a church position for. Yeah, because we need good staff, and what better than my grandkids. So the staff is saying, what are you going to do about this? Are you irritated about the situation with England? He says, I am more than irritated. I'm mad as you know what, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I'm going to do something very, very serious. And they go like, the big E, the big I. Yes.
I don't know that it hit 40.
Station.
40.
Damn you. You say, well, that hurts. It's meant to. Well, it didn't work. Henry says, you H with you. So it's very, very odd, isn't it? You thinking, I thought this would just scare him to death. He was shaking in his boots. But I think by that point, he had gone so far with his takeover that Paul III, I mean, you're out now. So don't come back crying and saying, oh, Holy Father, I love you so much. Kiss up. It isn't going to work. And Henry's not going to do it either. And if you talk about people who say, but can't we be Catholics? Hell no. No. You're losers, go to hell. Or worse, go to Scotland, where your type can hang out. But Paul III did not succeed. And so Anglicanism, at least in Henry's form, is now a matter of settlement. We'll continue there next time. Please come back. Great to have you all today. Thank you. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.